automating your book production. What happens when you outsource? All right, welcome everybody. I'm Scott Paton. He's Chaffee-Thanh Nguyen, and we're going to be talking about book production. All right, because we've basically moved the focus of our show to authors. You know, if you've got any questions, put it in the chat. We're going to answer them. If you've got any things you're wondering about, worried about, or whatever, we'll deal with that. We are live and in Technicolor. And so we've got a whole pile of topics for the next 6 months that we're going to cover. And some of them will be shorter, some of them faster. Well, I think there's about 100. So, well, no, 40. So once a week, maybe it's a year. Anyway, when it comes to book production, when it comes to authoring books, when it comes to producing books, there's a lot of topics when it comes to selling books. And so that's what we're going to be doing from now on. If you have any questions, if you're an author and you want to be spotlighted on our show, then just go to, and actually I have it. I'm going to put it at the bottom here. Thanks to Chaffee's smart thinking last week. free-ebooks.net/guest. It'll give you the calendar and you'll be able to pick a time and a date. Well, it's the same time every week, so good luck with that. But we'd be happy to have you on. So we want to kind of switch back and forth from talking about things that authors need in order to get the books out to talking about books that authors have had to get out. But today, Chaffee, we're going to be talking about outsourcing the book production. And one of the reasons I'm so excited to have you on the show with us today talking about that is because you are an expert on outsourcing your book production. Now, when I think about it, I think about, well, we need somebody to go chop down the trees and then someone to chip the trees up and smush it into some liquid or something and then, flatten it so it becomes a paper that we can then, print on and then bind and all the rest of it. But you go one step further when you talk about production, and that is you actually outsource the creative process, part of the creative process, the writing part, which most authors are, I'm the author, I write. What are you talking about letting somebody else do that? And knowing that that's one thing that you do a lot, I think that would be a good place to start, Chaffee. So you have 342 children's books, all #1 on Amazon. And you never wrote one word in any of those books, and you never drew one picture in any of those books.
Well, that's not necessarily true, Scott. I mean, the 342 is kind of pushing it. No, I'm just kidding.
It's like 12 or 14 or 16 in around there that you've got produced, not necessarily live on Amazon right now.
Yeah, so we have launched 6 or 7 books, and I have a partner in this business. So we launched 6 or 7, and we have another 6 or 7 that are completed, and we're constantly producing new ones. The one that we just finished was a Mother's Day book, which is we're going to launch that for Mother's Day, which is next month.
So it jumped ahead of the queue because you had all these books that are ready beforehand. Correct. And so you're not going to launch this like at Thanksgiving because you've got these 7 books ahead of it.
Correct. And then we're also developing a Father's Day book. Since we did Mother's Day, we're going to do a Father's Day book. So that will be in June. So.
Cool. So I had a question. Now I forgot what it was. What is your process for creating these books? Because you don't do the writing and you don't do the illustrations.
Well, we do in these books. So we have 2 kinds of books, right? One is what I call a story book, a novel book, and then we also have what we call special books. And our special books are kind of like written in prose. They're kind of like rhymes. And so we, my partner and I, do write the initial concept, the initial storyline, the initial prose, and then we outsource the fleshing out of what we write, and also the editing part of it. So it just depends on like, what you're looking to accomplish and what you want to create. So for us, it's always two things. When we have a regular book that's not a what we call a special occasion book. Special occasion books are holidays and special days like Mother's Day, Christmas, Halloween, Thanksgiving, those kind of things. And then regular books are just storybooks where we come up with a story and then create a summary around that and then outsource the actual writing of the story. So what is the story? What's the concept that we come up with for my children's book series? It's about a little kid. He's about 8 years old, and he learns lessons. And so the inspiration behind the book series was that my son was 8 years old and going through school and learning some lessons. And we decided, hey, why don't we just take some of the things that my son's going through, some of the things that he's learning, and start writing a book and share it with other parents out there. And so the concept is, first and foremost, what is the lesson that he's going to learn, right? And so we always start with a lesson. What is that lesson? At the end of the day, what did he learn? And then how did he go about learning that lesson, or what happened that he got in trouble that he didn't apply that lesson, and then he learned that this is the actual lesson. And so
so do you have an example of a lesson that you could share with us?
Sure. Let me see. Do I have one of the books here? I might have one of the books here. Actually, I got a couple of them. Oh, I have one of each. So this book here, for example, is Saving Money Makes Sense. Okay, so saving money makes sense, and so the lesson in the book, we always end with the lesson, is I know I should. Let's see. I know I should not have spent all my money because saving money makes sense. And so the lesson is, saving money can help you in the long run. And so how did he come about this? Is that he actually wanted to buy something and he needed to save up in order to purchase what he wanted. And instead of saving up, there was a series of events where he ended up buying a bunch of little inconsequential things or small things. And then when it actually came time for him to buy that big thing that he really wanted, he didn't have enough money. So he ran out of money because he spent it all on other things. And so the lesson there is, if you really want something, if you're looking to purchase something that is larger, then you're going to have to save for it instead of just buying every single little thing that comes up. And so that's an example of this book, right?
Awesome. And then you had a second book with a different theme, right?
Yeah, so this is one of our special books, right? So this is actually just an alphabet book, alphabet stuff with Nuff. And so in here, we just have kind of like, as I said, a prose, and we actually went through the alphabet. And so, surely you see all the letters, all the L's under the C, right? And so again, it's kind of like a rhyming little thing. Larry the Lazy Lobster licked the licorice like a lizard, right? So little fun rhymes and things like that. And what's cool in some of the books, like this one, each of the letters in here, we actually say count the number of times you see that letter on the page.
So you have a counting thing too. So it's really interactive for the children.
Yeah.
Or
and
the
then
parents.
In the back of the book, we have the key, right? So this is letter A. There's 7 A's in the letter. There's letter B. There's 10 B's, right? So that's a little key. And so as they go through and they read one of these prose, then they, for example, this one is what? N, right? Newton the Ninja Narwhal never saw northern lights at the North Pole at night, right? And so how many N's are in that statement? And so they have to count that up and then, check in the back of the answer book. And so fun little things
very
like
cool.
that.
Yeah, very cool. Very creative.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit. So just walk us through the process. You and your partner get together. You decide. You brainstorm, I guess. You decide, okay, we're going to do a Valentine's Day book or Mother's Day book or Thanksgiving Day book. And then what happens?
So again, we separate which kind of book we want to write. And so let's just start with a story, since most of the authors here really have a story in mind. Is again, with what we do is we always begin with the end in mind, right? That's one of the 7 habits of highly effective people. And so we begin with the lesson. And then with the lesson, we come up with usually 2 to 3, sometimes 4 different events that occur that will teach that lesson right? Or that the lesson is missing, so he doesn't apply the lesson and he gets in trouble. And so in our summary, we'll write what the lesson is, and then we'll write the scenario of 3 or 4 things that will happen. Like he goes to the store and he ends up buying some candy, or his friend wants a toy and he buys a toy for his friend, not realizing that he's spending money along the way. And then at the end of the story, it's obviously he wants to buy this big thing and he has no money because he spent it on, where did he spend it, and recaps it. And so that's usually just a summary. Like I said, usually a few paragraphs, 2 or 3 paragraphs, and then we take that and then we outsource that to our writer. And then our writer will take that and then break it out into separate individual pages. And with these little storybooks, there's usually about 30 pages, give or take, 25 to 35 pages, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. Actually, 25 is usually the smallest. But, so how do you fit the story of these events into 25 or 30 pages? And then once we have that done, where our writer writes a bunch of things, we come back and we review it, we edit it, and then it goes back and forth a few times, and we have the final product. Now, if you're a fiction writer, or if you're a some other kind of novel writer, romance writer, you can actually just write a synopsis, like I said, of 2 or 3 paragraphs of what you want that story to entail, and then you can outsource that to a writer, and a writer, a fiction writer or a romance writer or some kind of writer, can then take that and just sit down and go write, and they can write a full novel much faster than you or I, Scott, can sit down and write a full novel. So, because that's what they do, that's what they enjoy doing, and that's what they get paid to do.
So one of the questions that comes to mind, Chaffee, is how do we make sure that they're writing about what we want them to write? So obviously that's a growing process. In the beginning, you're going to be spending more time going over things with your writer than you would be maybe after 12 books are done, right? Because by then you're into more of a rhythm and a routine. Everyone knows what to expect. You know what information you forgot to tell them in the first book, and you're automatically telling them that in the 10th book.
Yeah, so outsourcing is it's a science of finding the right person, and it's an art of working with that person after you find them to develop that relationship between you and that individual, of them understanding what you want. And I'll say that our writer, she's probably the 4th or 5th writer that we found before we found somebody that really stuck. Just like our illustrator, we went through a good 4 or 5 different illustrators before we found one that we really enjoyed and worked well with. And so that's a process, and it's a process that you're familiar with, Scott, because you work with a lot of clients that outsource, and you have a virtual assistant company as well, right?
That's right. We're constantly trying to figure out how to get the right person in the right job with the right client, because it's like you said, it's
so what's
an
that
art.
That initial step when you have a new client and they're looking for a virtual assistant or an outsourced person that has certain qualifications? And obviously some clients want everything, right? They want to pay $10 for a virtual assistant that will do everything for them. So how do you deal with that kind of client, Scott?
It all comes down to expectations, right? And so we go through quite a process in terms of who the client is, what sort of character they have, and what their character. Some people are very sharp and they just want to get to the point. Other people are more social, so you kind of have to respect the type that they are, and then it's really about, like, what do they want done? Because oftentimes they don't really know they just know that I need help. So what happens a lot of times is they also are not used to letting go of the work, right? And this is me for sure, but they think of this job that they've got as this huge, massive ball, and they have to do the whole thing. And after I've talked to them for a while, I'm able to say, well, there's really this task and that task and this task and that task and this task and that task. And so all of a sudden you've got 20 tasks, and one of them they have to do. And then it's like they're shocked, like, oh, you mean I don't have to do this? I don't have to do that? No, all you have to do is show up and close and take the check and you're done. Oh, that sounds great, And then you have to get them to that point, because obviously the entrepreneur knows everything in the ball, and we don't. So we pull out, how do you do this part? How do you do that part? But my biggest aha moment has come from when I realized that they had this huge problem that was really 30 small problems, and 29 of the problems somebody else could do no problem, and they could just look after the one problem that was left, or challenge, or issue, or task, however you want to say that, right? But in this particular case, it was like, oh, I have this massive problem, and I'm the only one that can do it. And I said, well, explain it to me. And after 3 or 4 more questions, it was like, yeah, there's 30 challenges you have, one that you need to do, and the rest someone else can do.
So that's a key thing that you brought up, Scott, is break down what you want accomplished into individual tasks. And that's going to be easier for you to find somebody that fits that task versus I have 10 things I need to do and I want one person to do all 10 things, right?
Yeah, and it really is important, I think, that you find like one person per task. Now, maybe the same person can do 3 or 4 tasks. Maybe, like if it was like, maybe the drawing and the painting could be done by, cover painting, and the drawings in the book could be done by the same person. Maybe not. I mean, who knows, right? But the finding people who love doing that thing is way better than finding people that sort of like doing all of those things. And they all try to do everything, but they, that's the problem. Is like you'll get people who are your virtual assistants who, well, let's do all of this, and it's like, okay, but you don't know how to do any of it except for this one thing that I was the hook to bring you in, right? And so you really, but when you plan it all out, all of a sudden you can say, well, these are this type of job, and these are that type of job, and these are this type of job, and then you can kind of move it around. And when you're talking to, like, when it comes to the books, right, you have to have the written, you have to have the editing, you have to have the formatting, you have to have the cover, inside art. Where are you going to publish it? Like, can you put it on Kindle? Do you know how to put it on Kindle? Do you know how to put it on? What if you've got Morgan James or Penguin Books that are publishing? Do you know how to deal with those people? Then you get into the sales, right? Like, how do you actually sell your book? How do you get it into the bookstores? How, what sort of marketing do you do? Do you create a community? Like, let's say it's a mystery book. Do you create a Facebook mystery group where you engage people in different things and discuss things about your mystery books, or one book per group? Can they engage your audience? Can you engage your audience? And but then maybe you want to have a video of you talking about the book, or a video of you teasing the book, or so now you've got videographer, you've got to write a script, you've got to record it, you've got to edit it, you've got to know how to put it on Facebook or Twitter or YouTube. How could I forget YouTube? And and then it's like, well, like, what if you do like a meme thing, and like you try to do something virtual, or you try to do something funny? Well, now you need a different cartoonist, so that it just spirals into more and more and more things. And the person that's great at making a meme is probably not going to be very good at formatting the book so that it can go into into Kindle. Oh, and do you want to do an audio version? So now you need to have the audio equipment and the audio editor, and you make sure that your voice is, the right voice, or you hire a voice actor who then does all the talking for you, or a voiceover artist. And then do you want to put it on Audible, which is Amazon's audio book division, or do you want to make it a podcast? So there's lots of different, once you get into it, again, it depends on what you want to do. I have one friend who, he took every chapter of his book and he turned it into an audio episode on a podcast that he started because of the book, because he had 12 rejection letters. And he says, oh, I've got this book. I love the book. I've been rejected 12 times. I'm going to read the chapters. And those people encouraged him and encouraged him and encouraged him. And before you know it, he had 10 or 20,000 people downloading each episode. So then he went back to some of the publishing companies and said, look, these people, they love the book. And so they gave it a try. They said, oh, all right, fine, we'll publish your book. And it won in Canada the Stephen Leacock Award for comedy writing. So it was the funniest comedy book in Canada that year, and he won it 3 more times, I believe, or was twice in a finalist. So his whole career as a writer basically hinged on him speaking into a microphone and having people listen to his books. And every book he had come out, he did the same thing. And when the publisher, they didn't like that, and he says, well, these people have supported me. The publisher says, okay, you can do it on one condition, which is the last chapter does not get released on your podcast until after the book comes out. And now he's making audiobooks, and so he doesn't do that anymore. He's moved on to audiobooks, so he can't really have a podcast of the book anymore. But so
that tells you how much those publishers know, turning him down 12 times.
Right. And that's almost cliche-ish, isn't it? With these different things that get turned down. It turns out to be massive, right? Like Harry Potter, she's the same thing,
Yeah.
Colonel Sanders and his restaurant, the restaurants all
Right.
turned him down for a long time. So you need to just persevere and keep going.
Well, you brought up some good points, and I always bring this up with a lot of business owners that I work with, Scott, which is, your business, you should know what's going on in your business. Like a lot of people, a lot of entrepreneurs and small business owners, they just do stuff. And when you ask them, how do you do that? They go, I don't know, I just do it, right? I just take care of it. And so if you tell them to actually sit down and document, write down what you're doing, sometimes they have a challenge with that. And that's really the first step of automation, which is writing down what we call workflows, how everything flows, how all the work flows, and SOPs, or standard operating procedures. And so when you have your standard operating procedures broken down into multiple different workflows, now you know how your business is run, and then somebody can read that document or watch videos or whatever, however you documented it, and do what needs to be done because you've documented it. And so a lot of times what will happen is that a business owner or an author or somebody will start writing down the workflows of what's required to produce a book or to write a book, and they'll write down the steps, and then you take those steps, and then that's how we can now target individual tasks and outsource pieces of those workflows to an individual or to multiple individuals, put all that together. And as you're working with the individuals and explaining how to do each individual task, you're going to update your workflow, and you're going to update your standard operating procedures so that now your business is documented, and then you can remove yourself out of that business and work on your business instead of in your business. So now you're not the bottleneck anymore. And so you can hire multiple people to do multiple tasks. You can end up working on 5 or 10 different books at one time because you have different people doing different things, or you have multiple people doing the same thing for multiple different books, right? And it all starts with, as I said, workflows, standard operating procedures, breaking things down into tasks, and knowing exactly what that process is to get that book completed for you for whatever book that you're writing. Or books.
So the picture that you just put in my head as you were talking, Chaffee, and what you said I thought was brilliant, is instead of being an author, you're being a conductor, right? Because I had this picture
Absolutely.
of the conductors, now's the time for the violins to play, now's the time for the horns to play. And you've just got all these things kind of working together.
Well, again, the best business owners out there, all the multi-billionaires and millionaires out there, they do very little work in terms of the actual task work. And they do mostly management, right? They manage the pieces, or they manage the people who manage the pieces. Only the bottom line is that they're not doing the work, right? So
yeah.
They're the creative genius, shall we say, right? Like
Awesome.
Elon Musk doesn't build every single Tesla that he sells. Can you imagine him building every Tesla? It just doesn't happen.
Or test riding every rocket that SpaceX sets up into space.
Yep.
That would be pretty wild. Awesome. So thank you very much for that, Chaffee. I think we've got a good start on what you do to outsource the work. And it's really important that you spend the time, surrounding yourself with the right team. We've talked in previous get-togethers about masterminds and that sort of thing. And this is the other side of masterminds, where you've got a team that's actually doing the work, as opposed to a group of people coming together to, help everybody solve different problems that they've got. So with that, do you have a tip of the day for everybody?
Well, as you said, Scott, the tip of the day is that the first time you outsource any piece of your work, it's like you said, you don't want to let it go. It's like it's your baby, right? And you want it done perfectly. And so this is a really good quote that I heard from one of the coaches that I work with, and he was coaching a mastermind group. And if you're taking notes, I would write this down, because this is what our friend Jay Connor calls a writer downer, right? And so what he said was that two people working 80% is better than one of me working 100%. And so think about that, right? If you have two people that are not as good as you, only they're 80% as good as you, working and doing something, they're much better than just one of you doing 100% of everything. And so if you can build the team out and, and have 4 or 5 people working 60, 70% of you, that's good enough to get something done. That's still going to be a lot more than one of you doing everything. And so, that's what outsourcing is about. That's what it means to automate. It means to systemize and work on your business, is finding the right people to do things that are good enough, and then putting the pieces together. And the pieces that put together are going to be greater than you just doing everything by yourself.
That was awesome. And the audience went wild. They loved it. And the other thing too, so here's the dark side, because you kind of tweaked me on this. The dark side of outsourcing is we tend to think that we're the best at what we do. So we're an author, we've got this idea, we think we're great, and that's not necessarily the case. And I used to edit a lot of video. And when it became too much, I got a video editor in to help me. And she's like 4 times better at it than me. Things flew across and things did this. It was just like, oh my goodness, like so much better than me. And so that's the other thing, is like, you may think, wow, I'm a really great writer and everything else. And then your editor comes along and all of a sudden it's an entirely new book on an entirely new level. Or you outsource the actual writing. This is the plot. This is what happens, blah, blah, blah. And then your writer goes and boom, it's like 20 times better than you could have written. And you have to just say, my job is to get the best story out there, not to write myself the best story. Like, I don't have to draw the pictures. I don't have to do all the writing. I don't have to do the formatting. And work to where your strengths are, right? Like, there are some books you're going to want to write yourself because it's from the heart. It's personal. It's important. A biography or autobiography or a special story that way. And it doesn't matter, because you just got to get it out. But there are other times, like what you're doing with the children's book. We come together, we had an idea, we lay it all out. The writer writes it, the artist arts it, and then we have a book. And how much less pressure and less stress is it? You've got young children, and just imagine if you're I got old dog.
Hey Scott, case in point, I will kind of refute what you just said, because I have to. Even if you have heartfelt stories and you want to get something out there, doesn't mean that you have to write it yourself anyway, right? You can, think of all the celebrities, the athletes, the presidents, all those people out there that have written books. And in reality, almost none of them wrote the book, right? What they did was they sat down with a ghostwriter or somebody else, and they told their story. Like the person asked them questions, and they just answered their questions from their heart of what happened. And they told certain stories. And then that ghostwriter took those stories and then massaged it into a book for them and wrote that book for them. So, they didn't even have to write that book. They just talked their story. They talked their life or their vision, their message, and anybody can do that. And so keep in mind that you don't always have to write everything unless you're, again, the go-to end-all be-all specialist in a certain field, and nobody can write down because you're the only one that knows that. So.
All right. Well, I think that's a good place to end today's episode. So, Chaffee, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And Chaffee, before we go, if somebody is going, you know what, I really need to put out a series of teenage books. I've got a bunch of ideas, but I don't really have time to write. What should they do, or how can they get a hold of you?
I was going to say they should contact you and hire a virtual assistant and get them going. Only you can also go to my website at www.keyconceptcoaching.com or shoot me an email at chaffee@keyconceptcoaching.com.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So that's it for us today. Appreciate you all a lot, and we'll see you next week. Bye for now.